Okay, so I'm sure you're all familiar with this one, or I should say a couple of videos that recently went viral on Twitter a few days ago. It involves the director of research and development at Pfizer, Jordan Walker, talking to a journalist disguised as his date, I suppose. And as you'll see in the video, he revealed some deep dark secrets behind some planned research at Pfizer, supposedly involving mutating the COVID virus into new strains. Well, I can't put it into words as well as the original video, so let's have a look.
Pfizer ultimately is thinking about mutating COVID?
Well, that is not what we say to the public. No, don't tell anyone this. You probably shouldn't tell anyone. You probably shouldn't tell anyone. Okay? We're exploring, no, you know how the virus keeps mutating?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're exploring is, why don't we just mutate it ourselves so we can create undeveloped develop new vaccines, right? So we have to do that. If we're going to do that, though, there's a risk of, as you could imagine, no one wants to be having a pharma company mutating viruses.
Okay, so as you can probably assume, anti-vax people began all sorts of conspiracy theories based on this video on Twitter, YouTube, whatever social media platform. And honestly, we haven't even really gotten that far yet. So far, it seems very harmless at first glance. When seeing up to this part of the video, I was thinking that this director was just being fancy, and what they're really doing is trying to predict the next strain of COVID. As with the flu, it mutates, and by predicting what is upcoming is a good way to create a vaccine ahead of the season in order to better protect everyone. Actually, there have been a lot of talks about making COVID boosters a seasonal thing that you receive along with the flu vaccine. Right now, discussions are centered around a balance between how often we want to administer vaccines to keep up with the mutation rates while not making it too often so that the public would reject it. That's right, when scientists develop products like this, it's not just the science they have to consider, but also what kind of schedule to develop in order to make the public happy and willing to vaccinate. Anyway, I'm getting a little off topic, so let's continue the video.
Be very controlled to make sure that this virus that you mutate doesn't create something it goes everywhere.
Something crazy.
Is the way that the virus started in Wuhan. To be honest, it makes no sense if this virus popped out of nowhere.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, honestly, this is where I would start drawing the line between who I would trust as an actual scientist and who I would label as a conspiracy theorist. No credible scientist would tell you right now that they suspect the virus was purposely or accidentally leaked from a lab in Wuhan. Now, the accidental leak theory is not completely ruled out 100%, but the evidence for it is so limited and the evidence for a natural origin is so much more solidified, especially when looking at the genetic material of the virus. Even if there is a 0.1% chance or something of the virus originating from a lab, I definitely wouldn't suggest it even to a friend. No one sane would do that because you know for a fact that uneducated people and conspiracy theorists are going to take it the wrong way. But we'll see a little bit later that this guy is not actually a scientist and he was purposely lying in the video in order to impress the other person. Anyway, moving on.
It sounds like gain of function to me.
I don't know, it's a little bit different. I think it's different. It's definitely not gain of function.
It sounds like it is. I mean, it's okay.
No, directed evolution is very different.
Gain of function was originally a biological term with a scientific origin, but honestly, conspiracy theorists have really butchered that word, that when used in a casual environment like this, it just sounds like a conspiracy theory. Think about it. Oh, gain of function, how utterly terrifying. But if you don't know the context behind it, it's easy to get the wrong idea. Pfizer later made a response to this video and mentioned these types of mutations are not what you think they are, but rather additions to the original strain for spike proteins found in existing variants. We're actually going to get to Pfizer's response later, which will shed light on all this, so don't panic just yet. We'll get there.
Well, you're not supposed to do gain of function research with the viruses, they recommend not. But you do these selected directional mutations to try to see if you can make more potent.
Yeah.
So there is research ongoing about that. I don't know how that's gonna work. There not be any more outbreaks, because Jesus Christ.
I mean, my impression of Jordan Walker here is definitely not very positive. Not only is he giving the wrong idea about the research, he's also implying that nothing is under control when he says, I don't know how that's going to work. Okay, but with such a position in Pfizer, you should know how that's going to work and why you're doing it. Why are you making the virus more potent? What's the purpose behind that? But him saying more potent here is wrong, as we'll see later. Basically, the idea is that there is some virus modification seemingly going on at Pfizer, but it's not being portrayed accurately here. Again, I'll go over it as a whole later.
It's a revolving door for all government officials. It's pretty good for the industry, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's bad for everyone else in America.
We're going to see later, but it's actually not bad for everyone in America. Ongoing research like this happens all the time in order to keep up with current medications and treatments. It's not new to COVID.
Why is it bad for everybody else?
Because if the regulators who have to approve our drugs know that once they stop being regulated, they want to go work for the company, they're not going to be as hard for the company. They're doing their job.
What are you even saying? Is this real life? Right, you just get lucky that the regulator just happens to be, I guess, applying to Pfizer at the same time as they're auditing them? What kind of logic is that? Okay, there's a lot of video left, so I'm going to let it play until the end, and we'll just respond to everything all at once.
what is Pfizer doing, I guess, to optimize, the vaccines now?
Oh, we actually have a meeting about that today, so there's a lot. We're exploring, like, now, you know how the virus keeps mutating?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're exploring is, like, why don't we just mutate it ourselves so we can create undoubtedly develop new vaccines, right? So we have to do that. If we're going to do that, though, there's a risk of, like, as you could imagine, no one wants to be having a pharma company mutating fucking viruses.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we're like, do we want to do this? So that's, like, one of the things we're considering.
Okay.
For, like, the future, like, maybe we can, like, create new versions of the vaccines and things like that.
Okay, so Pfizer ultimately is thinking about mutating COVID?
Well, that is not what we say to the public. No. That's why it was a thought that came up at a meeting, and we were like, why do we not? It was like, we're going to consider that with more discussions.
Okay.
That exact reaction, right? We're like, wait a minute, like, people won't like that. So, the way it would work is, like, we put them in the virus in these monkeys.
Okay.
And then we successively, like, cause them to keep infecting each other. And we collect serial samples from them, and then the ones that are more infectious, like the virus, we'll put them in another monkey, and you just constantly actively mutate it. That's one way. Okay. Or you can even do, like, directed, like, simulation, which, like, we tend not to prefer. And then you just sample what the different, proteins on the surface of the virus look like over time.
Okay.
So then you can see the mutation, and you can kind of force it to mutate in a certain way you want.
Okay.
But you have to be, like, very controlled to make sure that this virus that you mutate doesn't create something that, like, it goes everywhere.
So, tell me more, like, what's developing with the whole, virus mutation process?
Well, they're still kind of conducting the experiments on it, but it seems like from what I've heard, they're kind of optimizing it, but they're going slow. They were very cautious,
Right.
Obviously, don't want to kind of accelerate it too much.
Yeah.
But I think they're also just trying to do it as an exploratory thing, because you obviously don't want to advertise that you're trying to figure out future mutation.
What's the goal for
Well,
Pfizer of doing that?
So part of what they want to do is, like, to try to figure out, to some extent, like, there's all these new strains of variants that just pop up. Why don't we try to, like, catch them before they pop up in nature, and we can develop a vaccine prophylactically for, like, new variants.
Yeah.
So that's why they're thinking, like, if you do it control in the lab, then we say, oh, this is an epitope. And so then if it comes out later on, like, in the public, we already have a vaccine kind of working on it.
Oh my God, that's perfect.
Mhm.
Like, isn't that the best business model though? Like, just control nature before nature even happens itself, right?
Yeah. If it works.
What do you mean if it works?
Because, like, some of the times there were just mutations that pop up, right? And we're not prepared for it, like with Delta or Omicron,
Right.
and things like that. So, who knows? I mean, either way, it's going to be a cash cow. COVID will probably be a cash cow for us for a while going forward. Like,
Yeah.
I obviously like
Okay, time to wrap this up, so let me be clear. Firstly, Jordan Walker here is making absolutely no sense, but the journalist isn't much better. The conversation is being directed towards the idea that Pfizer is making all these mutations, either through spreading it in monkeys or through protein analysis and simulations, trying to predict the next strain and hopefully have medications or vaccines ready ahead of time, which I think is an incredibly bold idea if you decide to mutate the virus yourself. When I first watched this video, I didn't know what to believe, because everything from the language to what he's saying leads me to believe that Jordan isn't credible whatsoever here. But perhaps Jordan is stretching the truth, or perhaps just doesn't know the research himself. We know later that he was purposely lying to impress the other person and didn't know he was being recorded. Anyway, to shed some light on the claims itself, let's see what Pfizer has said in response. Keep in mind that I'm not always a big fan of huge pharmaceutical companies either. I don't normally like defending them, but I do like defending the science. Let's take a look at what they say. Allegations have recently been made relating to gain-of-function and directed evolution research at Pfizer, and the company would like to set the record straight. In the ongoing development of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer has not conducted gain-of-function or directed evolution research. Working with collaborators, we have conducted research where the original SARS-CoV-2 virus has been used to express the spike protein from new variants of concern. This work is undertaken once a new variant of concern has been identified by public health authorities. This research provides a way for us to rapidly assess the ability of an existing vaccine to induce antibodies that neutralize a newly identified variant of concern. We then make this data available through peer-reviewed scientific journals and use it as one of the steps to determine whether a vaccine update is required. Okay, so for this first part, I think it's pretty clear. What they're saying is that basically whenever a new variant of concern is identified, they take the original SARS-CoV-2 virus and modify its spike protein obtained from the genetic information from the new variant, which means they're creating a simulated version of the new variant, since the spike protein is the most important component that separates variants apart and is the main driver for its infectious nature. This would allow Pfizer to conduct studies on their drugs and vaccines for this new variant, allowing them to know in advance if their medications would be effective here before the variant becomes widespread in public. Okay, I hope that made sense to everyone, but from what I can see here, many people interpreted Jordan Walker as saying Pfizer is creating new strains of the virus when they're actually not, according to the statement. They're just simulating new strains that have already appeared in public and using that to collect data ahead of time regarding their drug's effectiveness. The reason I'm inclined to believe Pfizer here is because this is a much more valid strategy than just creating new strains from scratch. A virus has the ability to mutate in so many different ways. You can't just predict the next strain easily just by infecting a couple of monkeys. So it makes sense that they would wait for a new strain first. Anyway, that's not the end of Pfizer's public statement. In addition to meet US and global regulatory requirements for our oral treatment, Paxlovid, Pfizer undertakes in vitro work to identify potential resistance mutations to nirmatrelvir, one of Paxlovid's 2 components. With a naturally evolving virus, it is important to routinely assess the activity of an antiviral. Most of this work is conducted using computer simulations or mutations of the main protease, a non-infectious part of the virus. In a limited number of cases, when a full virus does not contain any known gain-of-function mutations, such virus may be engineered to enable the assessment of antiviral activity in cells. In addition, in vitro resistance selections experiments are undertaken in cells incubated with SARS-CoV-2 and nirmatrelvir in our secure biosafety level 3 laboratory to assess whether the main protease can mutate to yield resistant strains of the virus. It is important to note that these studies are required by US and global regulators for all antiviral products and are carried out by many companies and academic institutions in the US and around the world. Fact-based information rooted in sound science is vitally important to overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, and Pfizer remains committed to transparency and helping alleviate the devastating burden of this disease. Okay, so I know for many of you that was difficult to understand, so let me break it down for you. They talk about how they're studying resistances to various drugs, including their own Paxlovid, which has been very effective lately as an antiviral against COVID-19. The thing about bacteria and viruses is that they can build up resistances against antibiotics and antivirals, which are huge threats to public health. COVID-19 is no different, but each situation is different and has to be studied independently to get a better understanding on how the virus would behave against certain antivirals. So for Paxlovid, they are doing a few things. First, they are running computer simulations or mutations of the protease and see how that affects its ability to resist Paxlovid. And second, which is much rarer, is growing the virus in vitro incubated with the antiviral. And this is helpful because if the virus were to develop a resistance, it would do so there. And then you can either observe what kind of mutations occurred or use the product virus on other experiments such as improving your own drug to deal with the oncoming mutation. Of course, no method here is going to be 100% accurate to predict the virus's mutation behaviors since there's always an element of chance and models aren't 100% accurate, but by getting ahead of the curve, scientists at Pfizer can create or improve drugs before SARS-CoV-2 becomes resistant, which would save many lives, especially during the early phases of a new strain outbreak. Keep in mind that they did mention the security of the laboratory, which may not be assuring for some people, but even if this virus did leak out, it would mean a virus that is resistant to Paxlovid, or more specifically nirmatrelvir, which is very different than an entirely new strain being born into existence. Finally, Pfizer did mention that this is a required step for global regulators. I'm not too familiar with the regulations of antivirals, but this does sound very reasonable and plausible that I don't have trouble believing Pfizer here. So in conclusion, Pfizer is indeed modifying the virus in some ways, but now we know the context behind how and why they're doing it, and it is perfectly reasonable. Of course, you can always claim that perhaps Pfizer is doing something in the shade that they're not publicly admitting, but until you have evidence for such claims, I'm certainly not going to believe it. So from what I can see, Jordan Walker is a director at Pfizer since they didn't deny it, but my impression is that he's a little bit crazy and a little bit unknowledgeable about what's happening at Pfizer. At least that's the story I'm inclined to believe. Oh, by the way, there was also a video released later when Jordan realized he was being secretly recorded and he goes kind of crazy.
Yes, one of the things we're exploring is why don't we mutate the virus?
I don't know what's happening, but I really need the cops here right now. What is your name? Because you fucked up. You really did. I'm about to sue you. This is absurd. I was literally trying. Okay. I'm not even a scientist by background. You know, but I came from a consulting firm that does business.
What? Can I pay their bill? Can I get a check for their bill? Please?
No, do not give me a check. No, don't let them leave.
Please unlock the door.
What is going on here?
He then says he was lying because the dinner was a date and he was trying to impress his date. I'm inclined to believe him. People say the stupidest things when on a date, and I'm no exception myself. You shouldn't be recording people without their permission. It's a crime. Don't do it. Not to mention that this asshole journalist pretended to go on a date with Jordan in order to squeeze information out of him, and this was apparently their third date. What an utterly pathetic and shameless act. Don't get me wrong, I'm not defending Jordan here. His outbreak later and him lying like that is not acceptable either. But out of the two crimes committed here, I think the journalist is the much more pathetic human being, going out of his way to sabotage the public trust in scientists, committing so hard and doesn't mind ruining a guy's life just to push a conspiracy theory. Disgusting in every way, shape, or form, especially during a time when public trust in science is so incredibly low already. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and thank you to my usual patrons Fireshard, Alan Morton, Miss Fixit, and Edward Martin for their generous support at Patreon. I'll see you in the next one.